Week 11 of the 2022 college football season is wrapped up, and today, as we begin to look forward to Week 12, I'll be giving you guys my updated college football rankings for this 2022 season. Week 11 turned out to be an insane week of action, and we've only got 2 weeks remaining in this regular season, so as we begin to look forward to the postseason, and as we head into mid-November, I'll be giving you guys my updated college football rankings here today. So that's let's get started with 1 through 7. Number 1 this week is the same as last week. That is Georgia. The Bulldogs beat Mississippi State 45-19, so a solid win for Georgia. And they are, I'd say, clearly the best team in the nation right now. They're 10-0. They got a strong resume. Obviously, that win over Tennessee definitely boosts that. And Georgia is number 1. That game was close against Mississippi State for a while, but the Bulldogs of Georgia pulled away in the end. He got the win 45-19. Ohio State's number 2. They beat Indiana 56-14. They're also 10-0. We got 4 10-0 teams. 4 teams remaining that are undefeated. Michigan is the 3rd and TCU is the 4th. And both Ohio State and Michigan, the 2 top teams in the Big Ten, coming off of dominant wins. Michigan beat Nebraska 34-3. And once again, they're also 10-0. And that's going to be quite a matchup in a couple of weeks when Ohio State faces off against Michigan. This year it is in Columbus, so Ohio State does have the home field advantage. But honestly, that's going to be probably the game of the year there between Ohio State and Michigan. We've seen some incredible matchups this season. I mean, you think of Georgia-Tennessee. That obviously was a huge matchup, even though it turned out to be kind of a dominant performance by Georgia. You could say the other game of the year potentially was Tennessee-Alabama. We also saw a great matchup between Alabama and LSU. So the SEC's really featured some really great games this season. But that Ohio State-Michigan game coming up here in a couple of weeks, that's going to be an incredible one for sure. 2 teams that are extremely strong on both sides of the ball, offensively, defensively. Both teams are big-time contenders. And, I mean, at this point in the season, you can start to argue potentially we could see 2 Big Ten teams in the playoff, especially if both Ohio State and Michigan finish off the season strong. And that's just based on the amount of chaos that we've seen towards the top of the rankings. I mean, we got 2 two-loss teams in the top 7 this week. That just shows we've seen some insane things happen in this season. And I mean, Ohio State, Michigan, both teams, I honestly don't even know who I'd take to win that game. Maybe Ohio State just because they have the home field advantage right now. But that's because of how close it is. I mean, both teams could definitely win that game. But when it comes down to it, you got to look at the slightest advantages. And in this situation, Ohio State does have that advantage. But Tennessee is number 4. I got them at number 4 over TCU. The Vols just beat Missouri 66-24. That was also a close game for a little while. But Tennessee pulled away and scored 66. That offense just in the second half really pulled away and looked really good. And they're 9-1 on the season. And Tennessee, if they win out, they win their last 2 games, I think they're in the playoff. I mean, that's a strong team. They beat Alabama. They've got a strong resume. They also beat LSU back then. A dominant win over LSU. I mean, that game wasn't even close. So Tennessee's got a strong resume despite their loss to Georgia. I would say Tennessee controls their own destiny to get to the playoff at this point. And then TCU's number 5. You guys may know if you've watched my rankings in previous weeks. I haven't been very high on TCU. I actually had them at number 7 last week despite being an undefeated team. But I was watching their Texas game, and they won the game 17-10. So it was a close game. But TCU to go on the road in a night game, Texas was favored in that game. And the Longhorns are a good football team despite having 4 losses on the season. That's still a good football team that Texas has. So for TCU to win that game, I was impressed. And that was their best win of the season to this point, I would say, for the Horned Frogs. And I'm going to move them up to number 5 this week. And I don't want to put them in front of Tennessee quite yet. I think if Tennessee and TCU faced off, I would take the Vols. But now, I mean, if you look at TCU, this is a team that is starting to prove themselves. And Max Duggan and that team, they are very much a college football playoff contender right now. And so, yeah, keep an eye on TCU. That's a team that if they win the Big 12 here, I could definitely see that team, getting onto the college football playoffs. So, yeah, they've obviously got a couple more winnable games than in the regular season, and then their Big 12 title game, which is going to be a huge one for TCU. And honestly, that second spot in the Big 12 title game is wide open right now. K-State definitely is a team that I'd say might be the favorite for that position, but it could be 3 different teams. LSU's number 6. They beat Arkansas 13-10. Kind of a low-scoring, kind of a scary game there for LSU. I mean, the Tigers really controlled that game. There never really was a point where we thought LSU was going to lose that game. I mean, maybe there were a couple of slight times, but for the most part, LSU led that game, and it was low-scoring. It wasn't terribly impressive, but Tigers got it done. and they're 8-2 on the season, still in front of Alabama, obviously the team that the Tigers beat just a couple of weeks ago. And there's the Crimson Tide at number 7. They beat Ole Miss on the road 30-24, a huge win for Alabama. They were down for a long time in that game, and they managed to pull off the win. And they're 8-2 on the season, moving up 4 positions after that one. So I think at this point, Alabama, with 2 losses, some might say Crimson Tide shouldn't even be in the top 10. But at this point, Alabama, the teams that are behind Alabama, I do think the Crimson Tide would beat. So I do want to put Alabama into the top 7 once again. I still feel like this is a very talented football team. Bryce Young, this team they're out of the college football playoff. For sure, this team is out of contention, but I still think Alabama is a good football team, and they are deserving of being ranked in the top 7 at this point. So it's a really interesting top 7 right now. Number 1 and number 2, maybe even number 3 are pretty solid between Georgia and Michigan, but 4 through 7 could go any which way, and honestly, there's teams after that also could be in the top 7. But moving on to 8 through 14, we got Utah number 8, and this is a team that I've been optimistic about all season, despite them having a couple of losses. I still feel like Utah's a team that has got a high ceiling. They're a talented team. Cam Rising, and they just beat Stanford 42-7. Utah, they don't have any chance to make the college football playoff at this point. And honestly, the Pac-12 in general is now out of the college football playoff now that Oregon has taken another loss. Honestly, going into Week 11, I did say I felt like Oregon still had a chance. Their one loss being previously to Georgia back in Week 1. But and if the Ducks did win out, Oregon, honestly, going into Week 11, I felt like was potentially playing at the time as if a top 2, top 3 team in the country. But that was obviously a very disappointing loss that they had last night to Washington. So Oregon is now taking a second loss, and the Pac-12 is basically out. And the Pac-12 is a solid conference. You got 5 or 6 teams in there that are pretty good teams, but those top 6 teams have just beaten up on each other, and the Pac-12 doesn't really have a huge standout team because of that, but there's several good teams in the Pac-12 this season. It's actually a really good conference. I think I've got 6 Pac-12 teams ranked this week alone. But yeah, Utah's number 8. I have got them ahead of USC, and I know USC is ahead of Utah in the college football playoff rankings, but I just can't put the Trojans ahead of Utah, knowing that Utah did beat USC, and that's USC's one loss. So I got Utah number 8 ahead of USC, who is number 9. They beat Colorado 55-17. USC, honestly, is also kind of a inconsistent team, especially on defense. Defensively, they've allowed a lot of points to mediocre teams. So USC, I'm not quite sure of. Honestly, if USC's defense was better, I'd probably consider at this point in the season putting them ahead of Utah. But for now, I've got Utah number 8, USC at number 9. Penn State's number 10. They shut out Maryland 30-0, and Maryland is not a bad football team. So a dominant win for Penn State. They cracked the top 10 once again, and they're 8-2. North Carolina's number 11. They beat Wake Forest 36-34. Look at North Carolina. They're really coming around. They are 9-1 on the season, and the Tar Heels are definitely one of the best teams, if not the best team in the ACC right now. I've got them as the best team in the conference right now. Their one loss was to Notre Dame back in the earlier parts of the season, but otherwise this team has been really good over the course of the year. North Carolina, some might say they've still got a chance to potentially make the college football playoff if they dominate down the stretch and win the ACC and get up to 11-1. They need some chaos to ensue, that's for sure, but North Carolina I do think is a solid football team at this point, and I definitely think they're very much in contention to potentially make it to the New Year's Six. Ole Miss is number 12. They lost to Alabama 24-30, but I was impressed by Ole Miss's performance. They're only moving down 2 positions after that loss. They're 8-2 on the season, and I still feel like Ole Miss is a better team than the teams behind them. That's kind of the way that I project my rankings, is who would beat who, and that's why Alabama's the number 7, because I feel like Alabama would beat all these teams here between 8 and 14 at this point. And it just goes that way with Utah out of USC, and you could say Ole Miss ahead of Washington and Oregon. I do like Ole Miss. I think they're a solid football team, 8-2. Moving them down 2 positions after their loss, but that still wasn't a terrible performance. Washington is number 13. They beat Oregon 37-34, moving up 6 positions after that win. They're 8-2, and this team, after taking a couple losses in the middle parts of the season, Michael Penix and this team is looking really good right now as we head into mid-November. And this is the time to get hot if you're going to. And Washington is in a really good position right now. So keep an eye on the Huskies moving forward. They are a dark horse team in the Pac-12. And for the Pac-12, this season to this point, it's mainly been Utah, USC, Oregon, and UCLA. And Washington has quickly cracked that top 4, and the Huskies are a team to really keep an eye on moving forward. Then you got Oregon at number 14. I got them moving down 8 positions after that loss to Washington. That's a game that you just have to have if you're Oregon. They've been dominant this season ever since that Week 1 loss. And once again, I felt like Oregon really had a chance to potentially make a run for the college football playoff still, despite their one loss, which was to Georgia. But now that they've taken a second loss, they're out of college football playoff contention. So the Ducks, just a brutal loss, losing to Washington there, their rival. But in the end, Oregon still has a chance to finish out at 10-2, maybe get to a pretty decent bowl game. 15 through 21, we got Clemson at number 15. At this point in the season, I mean, Clemson is in the top 10 in the AP poll right now for Week 12. We'll see where they are in the college football playoff rankings. I just don't like Clemson right now. I mean, that's a team that all season long, despite when they were undefeated at 8-0, and I just wasn't sure about Clemson. They just weren't dominant for a long time this season. And then after their 35-14 loss to Notre Dame, that was when I finally said, okay, Clemson, we're going to drop them quite a bit. I dropped them down to 15 after that loss. They beat Louisville 31-16, but it wasn't a terribly impressive win. They're 9-1, but I feel like North Carolina is a better team in comparison to Clemson right now. And the Tigers, it's been a tough past couple of years for them. They're out of college football playoff contention pretty much. But we'll see what happens down the stretch. Potentially they make it and they win the ACC, get up to maybe a 12-1 record. I mean, maybe they got a chance if a lot of chaos happens, but I feel like Clemson is out in my opinion. That's just a team that just hasn't been very dominant this season, so I got them at 15. Kansas State's number 16. They beat Baylor 31-3. Kansas State is such an inconsistent team. They're a good football team. I really believe that. They're one of the best teams in the Big 12. That's for sure. And I feel like at the end of the day, it's going to come down to TCU or Kansas State to win the Big 12. But, I mean, Kansas State, this is a team that's a wild card. I mean, you look at they beat Oklahoma State 48-0 a few weeks ago. Then they lose to Texas the next week in a game that probably should have won at home. And then you just go on the road. You beat Baylor 31-3. Baylor, one of the hottest teams in the Big 12 to this point. It's crazy. Kansas State is a good football team. Obviously lost to TCU by 10 points. That was a complicated game because, I mean, Kansas State was dealing with their injured quarterback situation during that game. And honestly, I feel like they would have beaten TCU in that game had the quarterback situation not been a mess. So Kansas State is a really interesting team. Do not sleep on this team one bit. I feel like they've got the highest ceiling in the Big 12, quite honestly, above TCU. I think Kansas State can be better than TCU. Once again, I feel like they would have beaten TCU on the road there if Adrian Martinez was in that game. So Will Howard has also played really well. So, despite Adrian Martinez's injuries, this team is doing just fine with Howard at quarterback. So, Kansas State is a team to not be sleeping on. This is a team that, honestly, they might be my favorite to win the Big 12 over TCU just because of how high their ceiling is in comparison to TCU, but you could say the Horned Frogs at this point are the safer bet because they aren't quite as inconsistent. Then you got Notre Dame at number 17. They beat Navy 35-32. Navy really snuck back into that game, but still a win, moving up 3 positions, and Notre Dame is 7-3. UCF is number 18. I finally got them in my rankings, and they are entering at number 18. They beat Tulane 30-31. Impressive win for the Knights. And at 8-2, this team is quickly looking like potentially the best team in the American Athletic. And for all we know, UCF could be in the New Year's Six. At this point, that potentially looks like what could happen now that Tulane's taking a loss and Cincinnati's kind of in the background. But I feel like UCF is the best Group of 5 team at this point. UCLA is number 19. They lost to Arizona. Some of you guys might have missed that game because that game ended at like 2 p.m. Eastern, but it was like 2:30. But anyway, they lost to Arizona 20-34. Arizona is not a very good football team, and that is a stunning loss, probably the biggest upset of the day. And honestly, one of the biggest of the season. UCLA playing as well as they were. That's their second loss. They're out of college football playoff contention for sure now. I got them moving down 7 positions after that loss. And, yeah, just very disappointing for the Bruins. Florida State, number 20. They beat Syracuse 30-3. They're quickly emerging as one of the top teams in the ACC at 7-3. Oregon State's 21. They beat Cal 38-10. I got them ranked at 21. They're 7-3, entering back into the rankings. And, once again, the Pac-12, I think I've got 6 teams ranked out of the Pac-12 this week between Oregon State, Washington, and then your top 4 and USC, Utah, Oregon, and UCLA. So The Pac-12 is a solid conference. They just don't have, once again, a big standout. But moving on to 22 through 25, we got Duke at 22. The Blue Devils are 22 in our rankings this week. There's more than likely they're not going to be ranked in the college football playoff rankings, but this team has been playing really well recently. They're 7-3. I would say they're potentially one of the best teams in the ACC right now. They're a huge surprise team. I mean, both Duke and Kansas have been huge surprise teams this season. We've seen several. But the Blue Devils, they've won 3 straight. They had the dominant win over Miami. They beat Boston College and just beat Virginia Tech 24-7. They're 7-3 on the season. They did take a couple of disappointing losses. I mean, their losses on the season are to Kansas, Georgia Tech, and North Carolina. North Carolina was a 3-point loss, same with Georgia Tech, and they lost to Kansas in a one-possession game. So Duke is a team that could, I mean, you flip one of those games that was a one-possession loss. This team is 8-2 right now. So I feel like Duke is worthy of being in the top 25. And once again, I'd be kind of surprised if they were ranked in the college football playoff rankings because I just don't think the committee is going to consider them. But I do want to put Duke at 22 this week just because I've been impressed as they've won 3 straight. Tulane's number 23, moving down 7 positions after their loss to UCF. Illinois is number 24 after their loss to Purdue. And Illinois has fallen off. That team just a few weeks ago had the Big Ten West by the Bullhorns, but Illinois has since fallen off, and they have lost a few games, and the Big Ten West is an absolutely terrible division. Fighting Illini are 24. I've still got them ranked as the top team in the West, but honestly, it's like a 5-way tie between Illinois, Minnesota, Purdue. Wisconsin is now a bit behind, and Iowa is a team that is creeping up there as well, so we'll see what happens. So I've got Illinois at number 24 at 7-3, and the Minnesota beat Northwestern 31-3. They're potentially playing as the best team in the Big Ten West right now, so I think Minnesota honestly might be my favorite right now to win the Big Ten West. I mean, you got Purdue, who is just too inconsistent to win the division, I think. Illinois is taking a few losses. They are down right now. Iowa maybe is the second team that I'd say could win the Big Ten West. I think Minnesota, though, once again, is my favorite right now, just because I think they're playing the best out of anybody in their division. But whoever wins the Big Ten West, it doesn't matter. They're going to lose to Ohio State or Michigan at the end of the day. But then you got your first 5 out: Texas 26, Oklahoma State 27, Cincinnati 28, Coastal Carolina 29, and Florida 30. Texas is a 4-loss team, but I still feel like that's a talented team. I can't put them in the top 25 right now with 4 losses. Oklahoma State has been playing terrible recently, but they're coming off of a win, but I'm going to still keep them out. Cincinnati 28, Coastal Carolina 29, then Florida's a 4-loss team at 30, but they're playing halfway decent right now. And dropped out this past week, Texas was 17, Kentucky's 22, NC State was 23, Liberty was 24, and Baylor was 25. So a lot of action this past week, and they definitely shook up the rankings. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this top 25, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.